In the previous lecture, I have explained the characteristics of database approach. What are the characteristics of database approach, and why we should use the database approach instead of file processing approach. And these are the four characteristics of database approach. First is the self-describing nature of database system, insulation between program and data abstraction, support of multiple view of data, sharing of data, and multi-user transaction processing. These are the four main characteristics of database approach that make it efficient, and it's make its processing fast instead of file processing approach. And in this lecture, I will continue from there, and I will explain the in detail these four characteristics. What are these four characteristics? First characteristic is self-describing nature of database system. Database system contains not only database itself but it complete definition or description of database system, database structure and constraint. The database that it is it's not a store only the data, it stores the data, definition of the data and description of the data, how the data is defined, how the data is described. The definition is stored in DBMS catalog. The definition of the database that is stored in DBMS catalog, which contains information such as structure of file, what is the structure of file that is stored in the database, the type, what is the type of the file, what is extension of file like zip file, not zip file, like image, what is the format of image, how the it will store in JPG format, PNG format, or all other format. What are the type that will store in the database? All these things are defined in the database catalog. And storage format, what will be the format of storage, how will the data, this file will be stored, what will be the structure of this file, like this. All these definition are stored. And there is various constraint on the data. Constraint on data means what will be the constraint that will be applied in the data when you are storing the data. Like if you are storing the data of any student, name of a student, then name of the student will be the correct string, array of character. And if you are storing the phone number, it should be 10 digit and it should be numeric, not any float or double value. These are the constraints that will be applied in the database when you are storing the data in database. And the information stored in catalog is called metadata. The information that you have stored in catalog is called metadata. Metadata means that it will define the data, and it describes a structure of primary database. This metadata describes the structure of primary database. What will be the structure of this primary database? This information will be stored in the metadata. But in traditional file processing, data definition is typically part of application program themselves. In the traditional file processing, it was not the part of the database, it was the part of application program. The program that will run this database, that will they will define the database. Hence the programs are constrained to work with only specific database. And those programs who runs these database, they have constrained, they 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 have to run only those specific database. If you change the specific database, then that program will not run, that have already defined, whose structure is declared in the application program. The structure of the database is declared in the application program. The application program that we are using, that will declare the structure and class of the program. For example, an application program written in C++ may have struct or class declaration, and COBOL program has data division statement to define its file. In C++ or any other programming language, we define some class or structure. The, in the class or structure have some attribute. The data will store in the form of class or structure in the file. But if you change something in the data, means if you are adding some new attribute in our class, then data will be changed, and the other file that you are using, that using this data, they may face occur. Why error they will face? Because if you remove some attribute of the structure, if you have stored the name, roll number, id, location of any student, if you delete the location and another program that is working on location, and he will fetch the location of the any student data, then he will that program will cause the occur, he will face some error. Okay. And this was the main disadvantage of using the file processing system. Whereas file processing software can access only specific data. I have explained this file processing could explain can access only specific data. DBMS software can diverse database by extracting the database definition from the catalog and using these definitions. And this this DBMS system software, we can check the constant definition of the data, how the data is stored, and our program will work according to the definition, how the database is defined, and that information is stored in catalog, and my program first will check the definition and he will use according to that definition, that this database. And this was not in file processing. That's why we use the DBMS software. You can read this line and you will understand. And second characteristics is insulation between program and data abstraction. In traditional file processing, the structure of data files is embedded in application program. So any change to the structure of a files may require change all program that access that file. Okay. In the traditional file processing, the program defines the database, but now the database is already defined, but program will use according to the database catalog, how the database is defined, and then that program will first read the database definition, how the database is defined, then they will use according to the definition of the database, how the database defined, they will use. But in the file processing, this was not possible. By contrast, DBMS access program do not require such changes in most cases. The structure of data file is stored in DBMS catalog separately from the access program. We call this property program data independence. This catalog data, DBMS catalog, that stored the definition of the database, that is stored separately. It is not part of the DB. It's not stored in data files, and which called the program data independence. This my DBMS is not dependent upon any program. Any programming language can use this database. It's not depend upon any program. My DBMS software, DBMS database is not depend upon any program. This program can access the DBMS, this database. This program cannot access the database, and the user can whatever want to access, they can access. This is the second characteristic of the database, program data independence. You can see an example of database catalog for the database. Database catalogs means database definition. We have defined a relation name is student, course, section, grade for requisites. Student has 4 columns, course has 4 columns, section has 5 columns, Grades report has 3 columns. Any person who want to use this database, first he will check the catalog, and he will read the student has 4 columns. Then he will access only 4 columns. He knows student has 4 columns, and his application program will access only those 4 columns, not more than 4 columns. He knows I have to access only 4 columns. I can get the information from these 4 columns. First he will read the catalog. This is the catalog, and then he will work according to this catalog. Columns means name, student, columns name, data type, belongs to relation. This is the catalog, database catalog. The characteristic that allow program data independence and program operation independence is called data abstraction. Data abstraction means hiding. This characteristic that allow the program data independence. Program data, this data is independent from the program that we will use this database. This is called the data abstraction. A DBMS provides user with conceptual representation of data that does not include many of details of how the data is stored and how the operations are implemented. Informally, a model is a type of data abstraction that is used to provide this conceptual representation. DBMS does not provide the how the data is stored, how these rows and columns are arranged, how will store in the disk. uh, uh, this is not the part of our goal. Our goal is to you how to use this database. Okay, the data model uses logical concepts such as object, their properties and their interrelationship that may be easier for most users to understand than computer storage concept. Hence, the data model hides the storage and implementation detail that are not of interest of most of database user. Most of database users are not interested how the data is stored in computer. They are interested how the database is created, what are the constraints in the database, what are the rows and column in the database. They are uh, interested only those but not in the how the data is stored in computer. And then third characteristics of support of multiple view of data. A database typically has many users, each of whom may require a different perspective or a view of database. Means there are many persons using the database and they are interested in different view. If some person want to some less data, some person want to access more data, and there are many combination of data that can be used by the user. There are many different user and there are different view of data. It support different view of data. But in the file processing, if you are want to access then file, if you want to use any file database, then you have to take whole file, even if you are not interested in some other part of data. But in the database you can use according to your choice. A multi-user DBMS whose user have a variety of distinct application must provide facility for defining multiple view. There are distinct application and they want to access according to their use, and this DBMS provides the multiple view. And these are the characteristics of DBMS. And fourth is sharing of data and multi-user transaction processing. A multi-user DBMS, as its name implies, must allow multiple users to access the database at the same time. At the same time, multiple users can access the same data. The DBMS must include concurrency control software to ensure that several users trying to update the same data do so in a controlled manner so that result of the updates is correct. It means the DBMS software should include concurrency control. Means if there are many people updating the database, then it should be changed in the database, because at a time there are many user will access the same data, and they will change and update, and these updates are changes should be reflect in the database. And that's why DBMS software, DBMS should include concurrency control software that will do this operation. A fundamental role of multi-user DBMS software is to ensure that the concurrency transaction and operate correctly and efficiently. This concurrency transaction should be operate correctly and efficiently, because at times there are many user will use the same data, and and they will change something, and it should reflect in the database very efficiently and correctly. Like if there is any software of any railway and there are many people are booking their ticket at the same time, then these changes should reflect very correctly and efficiently in the database. And next is the concept of a transaction has become central to many database applications. A transaction is an executing program or process that include one or more database access, such as reading or updating of database record. A transaction is an executing program that includes one or more database access, such reading and updating of each database record. Each transaction is supposed to execute a logical correct database access if execute it in entirely without interface from other transactions. What is the each transaction that we are doing, like reading data, updating data, that should execute without interference from other transaction. One transaction should not interference to another transaction. The DBMS must enforce several transaction properties like isolation. The isolation property ensures that each transaction must appears to execute in isolation from other transaction. Means every transaction that we are doing should be isolated from another transaction. They should not interfere to each other, even though hundreds of transactions may be executing concurrently. Even hundreds of transactions are doing executing concurrently, but they should not interfere to each other. This is the first transaction property. Second is the atomicity property. The atomicity property ensures that either all the database operation in a transaction are executed or none. Means either all the operation will should be complete. If even one of the operation fails, then whole transaction will be fail, and there will be not change any database. If all the transaction will execute, all the operation will execute correctly, then one operation is completed. This is the atomicity property. If you are doing the payment, if and you have entered the password, but your payment has become failed, then it doesn't matter. You have entered, you have followed some operation, like you have entered your password, but your transaction has failed, then there will be not change in your balance. And this is the atomicity property. And next topic is actors on the sense. In large organization, many people are involved in the design, use, and maintenance of large database with the hundreds of users. There are hundreds of users and there are many people, many actors like designer, user, maintenance engineer. They have different role, and I will explain the roles of the every actor. First actor is database administrator. In a database environment, the primary resource is database itself. Uh, Obviously, the primary resource is database itself, and the secondary resource is DBMS and related software. First resource is database, second is the DBMS software that will maintain, use, update, read, write. uh, That will be DBMS software and related software. These are the resources. The administrating these resources like database and database DBMS software and another software, who is administrating these resources is responsibility of database administrator. The person who is administrating these resources called database administrator, DBA. The DBA is responsible for authorizing access to the data, coordinating and monitoring its use, and acquiring software and handle resources as needed. The responsibility of database administrator is authorizing access. It will provide the access to the different actor, like how much data any user can access, how much data any designer can maintenance engineer can access, how much data any designer can access. These are the this will be the authority, this authority will given by the DBA, database administrator, controlling and monitoring its use, and acquiring software and hundreds resources as needed. This DBA will control and monitor its use, and he will acquire the software and hundreds of resources. If there is need of any software, then he will acquire the software as their need. The DBA, database administrator, is accountable for the programs such as security breach and poor system response time. This is the DBA will check the security breach, and if the system is not responding at a time correct, not in time, then DBA will check and he will call to the engineer and they will maintain. This is the responsibility of DBA, database administration. In a large organization, DBA is assisted by the staff that carries out these functions. For any large organization, there is a staff that carries out these functions. There are many people that carried out these functions. They are responsible for these security breaches and poor system response time. And second actor is database engineer. Database in database designer. Database designer. Database designer are responsible for the identifying the data to be stored in database and for choosing appropriate structure to represent and store this data. This database designer will identify the data to stored in the database and choose appropriate structure. This database designer will choose any appropriate structure, any proper structure, how the data will be stored. This will define any proper structure of the data, how the data will store, and they will store the data. It is responsibility of database designer to communicate with all prospective database users in order to understand their requirement and to create a design that meets these requirement. This is the responsibility of database designer. He will communicate with a different user, and he will and understand their requirement. What are the requirement of different users? First, he will understand all user requirements, and he will document their requirement. Then he will create the design according to the all user requirement, and according to their requirement he will create the database. The final database design must be capable for supporting the requirement of all user group. The final data base that is designed by database designer. It should support requirement of all user that are using the database. And third actor is end user. End user are people whose jobs requires access to the database for querying, updating and generating report. The database primarily exists for their use. End user, the people that he is using the data, querying in data means he is performing some querying and accessing the data, and reading some, writing data, updating, generating report. The that end user will do this. Casual end user. What is the casual end user? Casual end user uh, occasionally access the database, but they may need different information each time. They have sophisticated database query language to specify their requirement, and are typically middle or the high level manager or other occasional browser. Casual user means they may need different information each time, like high level manager, the manager of the database, the, will also access the database, and he will not access like the another user are using. He will access in another form, other occasional browser. That these are the casual user. Now are parametric and users make a sizable portion of database and user. Their main job function re- revolves around constantly querying and updating the database using the standard type of the queries and update called canned transaction. They have been carefully programmed and tested. The tasks that such user perform are varied. Banker, like any banker account balance and post withdraw and deposit. These are the nav user. And another nav user, like who is reservation agent of the airline, hotels and car rental companies, checking availability for the given request and making reservation. These are the nav user, like airlines, hotel and car rental companies. These are the nav user. Employee at receiving station for the shipping companies, enter package and identification via the barcode and descriptive information through button to update the central database for receiving, and it transit the package. And another user is sophisticated end user. The so- sophisticated end user include the engineer, scientist, business analyst, and other who thoroughly familiar themselves with the facility of DBMS in order to implement their own application to meet their complex requirement. These user are like engineer, scientists and business analytics. They will use this database and make their application according to them. And another user is standalone user. Maintain personal database by using read write program package that provide easy to use menu and graphics based interface. Standalone user, they maintain the personal database, and they will create any sub application, graphics or menu based application for accessing the database. An example is the user of tax package that store a variety of personal finance data for the tax purpose. Like the tax package, they use the database and create some graph chart and show the data, how the data is changing. These are standalone user. Advantage of using the DBMS approach. Advantage of using DBMS and the capability that a good DBMS should possess. The DBA, database administrator, must utilize this capability to accomplish a variety of objectives related to the design, administration, and the use of large multi-user database. First is controlling redundancy. First advantage of database is controlling redundancy. In traditional software development, utilizing file processing, every user group maintain its own file for handling its data processing application. In the traditional approach, every user creates their own file and use those file for its data processing for processing application. But it is not in the DBMS approach. This redundancy in storing the same data multiple times leads to several problems. This redundancy, like if there are many people using the same file and updating the same file, and this may cause some. This was very inefficient. The first, there is need to perform a single logical object such as entering data on a new student multiple times once for each file where the student is recorded. This lead to duplicate of the effort. Second, storage space. The second was because there are storage space is wasted when the same data is stored repeatedly, and this problem may be serious for large database. Like there is large database and there are multiple files in the database, and any people who will change and update the database and he will store in the database, and different user have different updates, and this may cause the very huge amount of space by the user. Third is the file that represent the same data may become inconsistent. This may happen because an update is applied to some of the file but not to others. Like there is some file related to other, if you update some file then it will cause some error to another file. These were the problem of the file processing approach. And but in the database approach, data items such as student name or birth is only one place in the database. This is known as data normalization, and it ensures the consistency and save the storage. In the DBMS approach, we create only one storage space, only one database, and every people use the same database and update, read, write, all other things. However, in practice, it's sometimes necessary to use the control redundancy to improve the performance of the queries. Restrict, Restricting unauthorized access. When multiple users share the large database, it is like that most user will not be authorized to access all the information in the database, because database contains the huge amount of the information and our data, and all the people are not authorized to access the whole information, because end user that is using the database is not authorized to access all the information, because database have contained the many sensitive information. uh, and only authorized person can access those sensitive information. For example, the financial data is often considered confidential, and only authorized person are allowed to access the such data. A DBMS should provide a security and authorization subsystem. This DBMS provides a security and authorization subsystem which the DBA database administrator uses to create accounts and to specify account restriction. This DBA database administration will create the account and specify the restriction, who can access the data and how much amount of the data he can access. This will defined and create and by the DBA database administrator. providing backup and recovery. The DBA approach provide the backup and recovery. A DBMS must provide the facility to for recovering from the hardware or software failure. In the case of any software or hardware where we have stored the database fails, then it should provide a recovery so that we can restore the database in the case of any hardware failure or software failure. Providing multiple user interface, because many types of user with varying level of technical knowledge use the database. A database DBMS should provide a variety of user interface. These include query language for casual user, programming language interface for application, program form and commands code for the parametric user, and menu driven interface and natural language processing for standalone user. Because there are different type of user and there are different programs, like query language casual user use according to his use. Programming language interface will use the same database, and command forms and command code use the same database. Menu interface and natural language interface will use the same database. Then this database DBMS should provide the multiple user interface. When not to use the DBMS, in spite of advantage of using DBMS, there are few situations in which DBMS may involve unnecessary or overhead costs that would not be incurred to in transaction file processing, traditional file processing, where we should not use the DBMS. What are the disadvantages? The overhead cost of using a DBMS are due to the following. There are some overhead when you are using DBMS software. Highly initial investment in hardware, software, and training. The generally that a DBMS provide for defining and processing data. Overhead of providing security, concurrency control, recovery, and integrity function. Yeah, these are if you are using the DBMS, then you have to provide the security, concurrency control, recovery, integrity function, hardware or software failure in recovery, backup, all other things. You have to provide the storage if you are using the DBMS. Thereby it may be more desirable to user to use regular file processing the following circumstances. In the following circumstances below have mentioned, you should use the file processing instead of the DBMS. Simple, well defined database applications that are not expected to change at all. If you have want to define the simple database that will not change at all, then you can use the file processing instead of using the traditional DBMS. Stringent real-time requirement for some application program that may not met because of DBMS overhead. Embedded system with limited storage capacity where the general purpose DBMS would not fit. Yeah, in the embedded system you can use the DBMS where the storage capacity is limited. No multi-user access to the database. If only one person is using the same database, then you can use the file processing, because only you will use the database and you can change according to your use. In these cases you can use the file processing instead of the DBMS. That's all about this lecture. Thank you.